Just in case you hadn't noticed, there are a lot of people trying to peddle BS these days. And one of the arenas that seems particularly true is in the world of food and nutrition. But there is a silver lining to that. You see, if you can learn to recognize nonsense when you see it in the realm of nutrition, you'll be all the better equipped to spot it in other areas of the public forum. In other words, let food be your training ground. If you can learn to spot BS in the world of food, you'll be just that much better at seeing it in other places. Welcome to the first installment of Truth, Discernment, and Noise, a new playlist here on Eat Is Love TV designed to help you develop skills to know when people are trying to pull the wool over your eyes. It's a nice way to put it. There are less nice ways to put it, but we'll just stick with that. Today we're going to start with three important concepts: possibility versus plausibility versus probability. The hardest to see and where a lot of people get hung up, and the hardest to describe, is the difference between possible and plausible. One way to look at it, as obvious as it might seem, you can think of possible simply meaning not impossible. I don't know who built the chair I'm sitting on right now. It has a label on it that says made in China. But if you claimed that it was built by aliens from another planet, the truth is, I can't disprove that. I have to admit that it's not impossible. So it's possible that aliens built my chair, but it's not plausible, is it? I mean, plausible means that based on things that I do know to be true, the claim could really be true. And I have nothing in my worldview that suggests that we have space aliens working in furniture factories here, so it's really not plausible that my chair is the work of a Vulcan or a Wookiee. Could it be that I'm wrong? Well, it's a stretch, but yeah, maybe I just don't have all the facts. So it's not impossible, is it? I don't think Chewbacca lives here. I don't think Mr. Spock works in a furniture factory. So based on what I do know, it's just not plausible, because a lot of the things I do know would have to be proven wrong. Now, if you said my chair was made in China, I'd say that's very plausible because I know that a lot of our durable goods come from China, and the label on my chair says so. And based on that information, I'd say it's even probable. Given what I know, there's a better chance than not that it came from China. But then I learned that there's a factory in Malaysia making this exact chair and putting labels on them that say made in China. Okay, so now it's plausible that this chair is from Malaysia because based on information I know to be true, that really could be so. But then I also learned that those Malaysian chairs only account for like 1% of the chairs we buy. So I have to say that this one is probably from China. It's possible that it's Malaysian because it's certainly not impossible. I even have to say that it's plausible because I know that some of these chairs do come from Malaysia, but it's only a small percentage, so it's not probable. Do you see the difference? Possible just means not impossible. Plausible means that you know of ways that such a thing could be true. Probable means that the chances of it being true are better than it not being true. A much less scientific way to put this is in how you say it. If you find yourself saying, well, it's possible, but then it's probably not plausible. But if you say, yeah, it's possible, then it's probably plausible. I know that's not the least bit confusing, right? Sorry. So let's create a food example. Beans. Suppose someone told you that beans are mostly protein. You're not a scientist and you haven't analyzed them yourself, so for all you know, you have to say it's possible. You've heard a lot of vegetarians say that they eat a lot of beans because they're a good source of protein. So based on that, you'd even have to say that it's plausible that beans are mostly protein. But then you read a nutrition label that says a bite of beans only has 2.5 grams of protein, but 8 grams of carbs. So then you'd have to say it's not probable. Now, someone could tell you that that information is inaccurate. Sometimes people get things wrong, so it's still plausible, but you look at a few other labels and they all say the same thing more or less. So again, it's not probable. It's possible, yes. It's even plausible, but it's not probable. Now, spoiler alert, by the way, beans are mostly carbs. They do have a lot of protein compared to other plant foods, but they are still mostly carbs. And a great source of carbs at that. in my opinion. Yeah, in my opinion. Yes, in my opinion, because there are some people who are literally anti-bean. Some say they have too much carbs. Some say they have too much lectin. Some say you shouldn't eat any plant foods at all. I happen to disagree with all of those people, but then again, that is my opinion. Okay, so now we have some basic vocabulary we can agree on, and that's step number 1. Know the difference between possible, plausible, and probable. Now, why is that important and worth your time? Because that's one way people BS you. It's called conflation. Conflation is when you think of two different things as being the same thing. Usually it's just an honest mistake we all make because we don't know better. People sometimes think peanuts are nuts, but the truth is that peanuts are more like a type of bean. But if you didn't know that, you might conflate peanuts for nuts and you could be forgiven for it. You might conflate tomatoes for vegetables when actually they're a fruit. You might conflate bison for buffalo. You might conflate pronghorn for antelope. And that's all forgivable and honest common mistakes. But sometimes people conflate things on purpose. This gets tricky, but bear with me here. Here's a thing I honestly read not too long ago that someone wanted me to believe. The line of thinking went like this. A lot of people say we eat too much white food and that it's bad for you, but cauliflower is white and cauliflower is good for you. Therefore, white food is good for you, so go ahead and load up on sugar and white bread because there's nothing wrong with white food. It's insidious. It's hauntingly similar to a well-known Monty Python scene, and that should tell you something. Cauliflower is white. Cauliflower is healthy, therefore white food is healthy. Therefore refined sugar is healthy. They're conflating the nutritional merits of cauliflower with that of sugar, which is obviously nonsense. But I actually read this in a published article. Now that type of thinking is sometimes referred to as specious. Specious means something that seems superficially plausible, but is actually wrong as soon as you think about it for just a second. The dog ate my homework, so it shouldn't affect my grade. Yeah, sure. It might be true. It's even plausible, but we all know it's a fib, so it's a specious defense. I'm not a scientist and I haven't personally analyzed the nutritional content of cauliflower and table sugar, then yes, I have to admit that in my limited little tiny brain, it's possible that they're nutritionally similar. And so if someone argues that since they're both white, they are similar, then I still have to consider that it's possible. But I've read enough from otherwise reliable sources that they're very different. So to me, it's not plausible. Saying they're the same based just on their color is a specious argument. It might look convincing if you don't know any better, but if you know the first thing about food, you know it's BS. So when you're listening to people who want to sell you on a way of eating, you now have at least one tool for parsing out the BS. Notice if they are conflating possibility and plausibility and probability. If they can make something seem plausible and they can make other little supporting arguments seem possible, then they might convince you that their claims are actually probable. Now just see when you notice instances of that. Here's another common one. We know that unused calories can turn into body fat. We know that exercise can burn calories. Therefore, say some, the only reason for obesity is that people eat too much and exercise too little, and it's as simple as that. This is known as the calories in, calories out way of thinking, also known as all food is good food. It doesn't account for the fact that different foods behave differently in the body. It doesn't account for the relationship between hormones and metabolism. It doesn't account for a person's resting metabolism. By the calories in, calories out myth, you would have to run for 50 minutes to burn off a 12-ounce can of soda. A lot of drinks nowadays come in 32-ounce size, so you'd have to run for 2.5 hours to burn that off. Do you know anyone who runs for 2.5 hours every time they drink a large soda? Never mind the fries and everything else they just ate, just the soda is 2.5 hours. I don't know anybody who lives like that. Obviously it's BS, so it's another specious argument. Food has calories, movement burns calories, therefore you have to burn the calories you eat and it doesn't matter if it's broccoli or french fries. It's a specious argument because they're conflating all foods as being the same. Now here's another one that's likely to piss off some of my friends. The line of thinking says protein is used by the body to make muscle and energy. Body fat is made from excess carbohydrate. Therefore, by only eating protein, you will only build muscle and no body fat. That skips over two important details. One, that excess protein, if not passed through in urine, gets turned into carbohydrate, which can then be turned into body fat. Two, there's a limit to how much protein can be converted into energy. Okay, how many of my friends are hitting the unsubscribe button right now? I can almost hear the clicking. So what that means is if you're still listening, I would implore you to hit the subscribe button just to help me compensate for all the friends I'm losing. Truth is expensive. You know what else is expensive? Everything. Everybody needs money, so everybody is trying to make a buck, so it's often in your best interest to ask yourself where the money is. There's a popular diet out there that some say helps lower blood pressure, and it just so happens to include a lot of dairy. It also just so happens to be funded largely by a couple of dairy associations. Now, that doesn't mean it's fallacious, and it doesn't even mean it's ineffective, but it does mean that you might want to question the motives. Now, there are some very popular online dietitians who are really strong proponents of the whole calories in, calories out view, and that all food is good food. It just so happens that they are on record as taking oodles of boodle from junk food manufacturers. So, follow the money. They say numbers don't lie, and that may be especially true when those numbers have dollar signs attached to them. Which leads us to industry-sponsored science. It's well established and super important to remember that industry-funded studies almost always reliably support the conclusion that they were paid to find. Studies on cigarettes that were funded by the tobacco industry concluded that cigarettes are non-addictive and harmless. Several oil industry-funded studies have concluded that the use of fossil fuels has no real impact on the climate. Now, I don't love generalizations, but here's one good one. Don't trust industry-funded science. When you pay people to find scientific proof of pretty much anything, they will probably succeed. Does that mean that we shouldn't trust science? No, of course not. Somebody recently said that 96% of all scientific studies were false. I had to wonder where that number came from. Some scientific study, I suppose. I mean, it just makes your brain hurt, doesn't it? Still, follow the money if you can. It might not give you answers, but it can lead you to the right questions. It isn't just money that can motivate people, by the way. Some people are really more concerned with adulation and conveying a certain kind of image. You can almost guess someone's general worldview just based on their diet. If someone tells you they're a vegan, you might believe you know something about who they are. If they're an avowed carnivore, you might have some success in knowing some of their other life choices and affiliations. I'm not even going to go there for now, but maybe later. And there are definitely some exceptions, some of whom I've known, but I have to admit that there have been times when I've gone to my little organic grocery store down the street and I'll see a car with a certain kind of bumper sticker, and I admit to thinking, I wonder why they're here. It's totally judgmental and possibly unfair, but let's face it, we associate certain food choices with certain value systems. And just to take it to an extreme, we all know that a lot of religions have overt prescriptions when it comes to food. Pork is prohibited in Islam, Judaism, and some Christian sects. No shellfish in Judaism. Many Hindus don't eat beef but love dairy. Strict Mahayana Buddhists don't eat meat, though Theravadan and Tibetan traditions allow it. Seventh-day Adventists are largely vegetarian. Eggetarian egg worshippers of eggism don't eat eggs, although some sects only eat eggs. More so, I'm told. But you get the point. Our food ideas are very integrated with our identity constructs and can reflect our spiritual and even our political self-identities. Some people will even talk about their food choices when describing themselves. I know the vegans get a bad rap for this, but my experience is actually that it's the anti-vegan crowd who really makes a big, loud point of it. Poke around YouTube food videos for 5 minutes. And you'll find a ton of people who proudly and loudly talk about how anti-vegan and pro-meat they are. Really, they are much more fanatical than the vegans. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, but this is already a lot. So for now, here's your homework. 2 parts. 1, take note of the difference between possible, plausible, and probable, and try to notice at least one instance of someone conflating those things as they try to convince you of something, whether it be related to food or something else. 2, ask yourself the ways in which your food choices are a reflection of your own self-identity. Do you tell people about your food habits when you're getting to know them? Do many of your friends know how you eat? And if so, why? I'd love to hear how this goes for you, but for now, it's time to wrap up this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Ciao.